Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this year's On the Table 2019 event, the letter to Madam Mayor. We are going to get started with a couple introductions. My name is Jamira Alexander. I am the co-president of Public Narrative. And the question that I want you all to answer as we pass the mic is, what makes you worth knowing? So think about that for a second. What makes you worth knowing? Please don't be cynical when you answer. So I'll start. So I think I believe what makes me worth knowing is my ability to connect with people. Okay. Who was he gonna name?
My name is Susie Shultz, and I work with Jamira. We're co-presidents together at Public Narrative. And I would say the thing that makes me worth knowing is probably my dogged history of journalism in Chicago and my just bubbly sense of humor. How's that? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tracy Bain, publisher of the Chicago Reader, and I would say my 35 years working in Chicago journalism and the stories that can lead to.
Hi, my name is Laverne Morris. I'm just a regular citizen, but no, concerned citizen, but actually my company, I own a jury consulting company, okay, Jury Think, and what makes me worth knowing is I'm a connector. I tend to bring people together and help them find resources in all different fields.
Good evening. I'm Bathsheba Wyatt Draper. Why am I someone that you should know, or why am I interested? Let's just say I've been a lot of places, seen a lot of faces, worked from the grass to the glass ceiling, and I'm still here.
Hi, I'm Yasmin Dominguez. I'm worth knowing because of my enthusiasm for journalism and its future, and my willingness to help people.
Okay, so this evening we're going to talk about what makes our ideas about journalism in Chicago worth Mayor Lightfoot knowing. Okay, so to start the discussion, we're going to first talk about what we want Mayor Lightfoot to understand about the role of community and ethnic media in the city of Chicago. Yes, so what do we want Mayor Lightfoot to understand about the role of community and ethnic media in the city of Chicago?
Susie has a lot to say too. I would say that given that there are probably more than 100 different community and ethnic media outlets in print and online, that the city of Chicago needs to figure out a way to adequately include them in the administration in terms of coverage and access to information, make that information more easily accessible and transparent so that small organizations don't have to go through that whole FOIA process, to make the process not as adversarial when journalists are seeking information, knowing that some of these smaller organizations don't have the legal teams to be fighting FOIAs left and right to try to get to the information.
I'll go through this. I think the community and ethnic media in Chicago, and it's actually, the estimates are closer to 200 because we have websites and we have, they are Chicago's history. They are really, we are the world. We speak more than 100 languages in Chicago, and we have 4 Ukrainian language newspapers. We have a Lithuanian press that has been around for over 100 years. And when there was a revolution, they were the place where the language was kept alive. We have, interestingly enough, we probably, our black and brown press are more depressed, even though we're in the middle of a civil rights movement, than they have been in recent years. But they are the places that people go to find out what is going on. And what is going on in their neighborhood, what is going on. Some of the ethnic and community media deals with geography, what's going on in my neighborhood. Some of it deals with race, some of it deals with religion, some of it deals with issues. Do you want to go in for education? Do you care about what is Fred Lowe's website? It deals with black men and how the world looks through their lens and how things affect them. And so I think for the mayor to understand how rich these media outlets are and how they connect with people and how trusted they are at a point when our legacy media, is struggling like so many other media outlets across the country, to know that this is a place that these are places that can actually speak right to the people, mean that all the concerns that Tracy was talking about should be lifted, and they should be brought into to the fold in terms of communicating information about all of the things going on in Chicago.
I think there has to be a plan. As you indicated, there's so many different media outlets and resources to get information. I think what has to happen is that the hall has to establish a level and consistency of getting the news out correctly, leveling the playing field, those issues that are important to different demographics. You can address that, but there should be a blanket cover, that everybody gets the same thing. So when we're talking about, say for instance, police brutality, everybody gets the same information that's the truth. It's not tilted from one side to the other, whether it be by the FOP or the chief of police. It's not this is just the truth, and I want you to see the truth so then you can better understand what's going on. The most important thing is that nothing can be changed tomorrow. Everything has to be changed one day at a time. And be very careful about who you do choose. There'll be a lot of people who will come before you in suits and with pictures and credentials who don't actually talk to anybody. So you got a lot of people perpetrating media. So I think she needs to establish people, you say they have a history of actually getting information to the people who are interested in working together to develop that type of platform. So if it comes from her office, it's the truth. There's no fake news in this. I think if that can happen, the people can begin to feel a little bit more comfortable, because the way it is now, we hear sound bites from everybody. Even on Facebook, everybody's got an opinion because they're free. So if we can find a way to have a outline or a plan of how the information is going to be disseminated and get that information to the people who are actually reaching people, I think it'll make a big difference.
You said that about coming together and developing a plan. Like, how do you suggest we initiate that? Like, where does that start? Because oftentimes in working with groups, you have to establish, how do you establish a norm, I would say, so that like it isn't perceived that one group is higher than the next? Like, there's no elitism in this, but we're in this together. How do you establish that? Like, who takes the lead or takes charge in that, would you suggest?
I think her office takes the lead. The playing field has to be level, whether you represent 2,000 people or 2 people. If you're getting consistent information to those people in that community, then you're important. It's just like when you are starting to have a program and something's happening, everybody wants to be a part, but everybody can't come in at the same financial level. So the person that brings only $1,000 should still have access to some basic information as the $10,000 person, because those people that they're reaching are just as important. So I think it has to start in her office. She will set the bar and let everyone know that this is not a who's who, this is about who do. You see what I'm saying? This ain't about how many pictures you had with the elected officials. It's about how many people you've actually touched. How many people can you call a meeting? How many people are gonna come out?
And I think And I think, too, what's important is what's the information. So, you know, the Tribune is not going to print a list of all the vaccination availability places where we can get free vaccines. But people who live in the community and have children want to know that. So what's the tier of information that needs to go directly to the community, where it will be disseminated directly to the people who really will use it and who really will care about it? And what's the tier of information that, you know, some of the community and ethnic media, they aren't going to necessarily have the bandwidth to do larger investigations. So what is this? What is the information that maybe we can find cooperation with among the bigger outlets, so that the information that they are getting and sharing that may have to do with, for example, the Chicago Reporter did an amazing series on a database on the police brutality settlements. And for me, that was information that should have gone out to all the communities, all the zip codes where those settlements went to. And having partnerships with new community outlets to be able to say, hey, you can't print our 3,000-word story, but here's a 500-word compilation of it, and here's a place where people can click to get more information, so they can look through that database, and they can find information that will be helpful for them. There has to also be a sense of cooperation with the outlets to figure out how can we get to audiences, and how can we make sure that the audience we're serving are informed.
And I would say one of the ways the city gets information out is through advertising and marketing, and they certainly don't do that in any kind of judicious way. Two ways I think the city can help transform the community and ethnic media landscape, and that is through the agencies like the Chicago Department of Public Health, CTA, Parks District, all these agencies, DCASE, they spend a lot of money in mainstream media and on social media and other places to market their things, and a lot of them are not utilizing community and ethnic media in doing so. The other thing I think that the mayor could do is also make some of the city's assets more available to media outlets. So for example, the J.C. Decaux multi-racks are abysmal. The distribution of the materials is the cleanliness, the upkeep of those news boxes is horrible. And I want transparency into what that contract is. How much does J.C. Decaux make? And can that contract be severed if they're not doing their work? And can we make sure that community and ethnic media have a judicious way to have access to distribute their publications in those spots, instead of out-of-town papers or advertiser rags, or publications that really not even Chicago? That's our taxpayer dollars, and why isn't it being utilized that way? CTA inventory for advertising. Other things that the city has assets of that could be utilized to promote local journalism in partnership, and also be made available to nonprofit journalism to utilize to promote what they're doing for memberships or whatever it might be, without crossing boundaries of sources and conflicts and all that other kind of stuff you can do. These can be separate. DCASE and Chicago Department of Public Health take out advertising in other places. Why aren't they doing it in significant ways in the way that they could be for community and ethnic media?
Because those are the sources that will get right to people.
So our next question, what is your own legacy in media, and what role does the community play in supporting media institutions? As I'm listening to the discussion around the first question, it sounds like a part of our takeaway in our memo needs to be a request for a meeting with the mayor and the community and ethnic media outlets to simply sit at the table together to have an understanding, to give the mayor an understanding of what these outlets do, what they add to community. But before we get to that stage, what is our own legacies with our organizations, and what part does the community play in supporting the legacy of our organizations?
You can actually tell.
Okay. Right? I kind of wanted to be objective a little bit. Like, is it okay?
Small group,
So I've spent, I don't know, upwards of 20 years in the Chicago media. Been at the Sun-Times. I've been, I actually played a role at the Chicago Department of Public Health. I did my as I say, my private master's degree in government and politics. So I know a lot of the different, I've worked at the Chicago Reporter, and I've run a couple different newsrooms, and all of this has led me back to trying to make journalism better by trying to make sure that the voices of people who are doing amazing work are not ignored, but are elevated. So public narrative, we were once Community Media Workshop. We kind of reverse engineer journalism. We teach people in communities how to talk for different audiences, tell these great stories, so that, because when we get into, because we're also a nonprofit, and we have the same problems that nonprofits have. We know that when you tell a story, you're so relieved to have found the story, that that's the story you tell over and over, but it's not the same story that people, not every audience will hear it. So, and we bring people together with journalists, because journalists now more than ever are siloed. They don't have the chance to go out and roam in the community as much as they used to. You have to produce a story, so you have to have intentionality. I'm going out here to do this, and I will do this story. I can't say I'm going to wander for 2 days in a neighborhood, and I don't know what I'm going to find. I just want to meet some people. And you could do that at one point. So, so we need to find a way to, I think we need to find a way to shore up both the community and the news outlets, both legacy and community and ethnic media. But I think the key to it is making what they produce relevant. And if they are relevant, then people will want to come to them. But that means they have to go to people. So I think I'm going to wrap up. I'm not sure if I answered both questions, but there you go.
I think that the legacy I bring to this is that I've had to do the business side in order to do the journalism side. So when I was hired at the Reader last October, I was brought on just to do the business side, and I missed the journalism side, but now I know my role is to save the job of journalists, not be a journalist, and to take my 35 years on the business side accidentally and make it more purposeful. So the ways I want to do that are piggybacking what Susie says. One is working from the inside of media, partnering with groups like Public Narrative and others on the parallel path with us in media to have more clout on things like the census, on things like speaking to the mayor and other institutions, on the bringing together nonprofit and for-profit, allegedly for-profit journalism outlets, where we have similar interests, where we can work together. But in addition, we're working with some of the legacy print papers to also work on the business side of this, where we go together and pitch advertising and jointly. So we've got 8 legacy papers working together right now. We're going to start just with 8 to see if we can convince institutional and business and auto dealers and others that they need to be more engaged with legacy media, print and digital, to make their case for branding, since we know that a lot of the money is going to digital, but it's going out in the universe and you don't know what works or what doesn't work. So for me, my legacy on the business side is to take those learnings that I had at Windy City Times for 34 years and apply them to a bit bigger platform at the Reader and kind of use that as a springboard to help lift all boats.
My legacy is a little bit different, maybe. I do have the degree in journalism, and I've been printed before, but I want to tell you about what I find to be a shortcoming of the media, is they continue to do things the same way. For instance, I was working on the campaign for Kid Care, insurance for the state of Illinois' children. You saw it once or twice on the news when it was launched. You don't hear about it anymore. And I'm doing the outreach. You have to go where the people are. The people are not in the usual places, wherever the usual places are supposed to be. I would go, and the information for Kid Care is in the emergency room. The parent doesn't need it when she's in the emergency room. It needed to be given out at the school. You know, the daycare, the church, the grocery store, where you meet people. We've got to change the mindset of media too. Media has just taken what they usually do and now they do it electronically. And I agree, you no longer have people who go out into the communities and really have time to really get to the quote unquote root of stuff. But I think that if media would be more inclusive of the people, you know, and when you're launching something new. So they're launching this new program, whatever it might be. That needs to be where the people are, where the people can get it. Don't just put it on the 5, 6, 3, and 4 o'clock news. Because people not watching the news all day. I watch it one time at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm almost sure the same thing is on at 10 o'clock. You know, so I don't do that. So there are places that I frequent. There are places where people gather, whether it's a social club or their home. You have to learn how to reach people where they are. Media has to get out of this time frame they have. I know someone now that's launching a new media campaign to the same people that they launched it to 2 years ago and it didn't do anything. Because the people, that particular area are not the people that the service really caters to. You know, you don't go to Barrington and talk about hardest hit. You don't go to Barrington to talk about the hardest hit program. You talk about the hardest hit program in the heart of the city and in those surrounding suburb areas that have been traumatized by the economy. But that's not what they do, and I feel that's so shortcoming for the people that you say you're trying to serve. It's almost like they need to do need assessments before they decide where they're going to put their media dollars, their marketing dollars. I think they need to be a little bit more inclusive of that. And I think those people who are working in the communities, those legacy papers, I think they need to be a part of the plan when you're going to roll this out. Don't roll it out and send them 25 brochures, and now you can check that off your box, you know, because that's not getting the word out. In anything you do, it requires work. It requires a plan. And the same plan that worked back in 1950 is not going to get to the people in 2019. Those are just my thoughts.
So the only thing I would say is that yes, and sometimes those same plans do work if they're updated and if they're, so when I was at the Chicago Department of Public Health, I built up a whole list of ethnic and community media because the issues that we had, the issues with HIV and AIDS, the issues with health disparities, racial disparities in healthcare, the issues of vaccination. People were telling me, well, you just want to go to the Tribune. It's like, no, we want to raise rates in vaccines. Let's march in the Bud Billiken Day Parade. And nobody had thought of that. So we walked around, you know, Chicago Department of Public Health with T-shirts and hats, handing out things. Have you gotten your vaccines? So with more information directly to people, and we put information in the Defender, because that was the population that really needed to hear that. So there are some of those old strategies that worked that can be updated. If those outlets, the 8 you're talking about, and maybe 16, 24 more, are at least part of the media strategy for the mayor in how to get key, crucial information out now, then that, to me, sounds like, you know, it's going back old school, but it's going to move things forward.
I agree. One of the things that when I was doing key care, I went to the Ford Motor Company. I went to the union at Ford Motor Company on Torrance and asked them to have access to pass out flyers. Everybody in Ford got insurance. They don't need kid care. But that doesn't mean their niece doesn't need it. Their child doesn't need it. So you utilize the people who are in that position to get the word where you can't go. So I agree with you that we have to come up with more creative ways to get it out. And I think if we can do that and understand that change is needed, it could work.
I mean, I think the other thing, and maybe it's a question you're going to have, is what is the role of for some of the younger generation of influencers, bloggers, YouTube, that type of thing? Do you see that as part of the strategy, or you really want to go back to the various outlets that you've already identified. Because we do some of the information that you've talked about, perhaps like HIV/AIDS, for example. Maybe those are not so much those that read print media, but they will look at something that comes across their screen on their phone or whatever, or texting, or these different things.
Yeah, I would definitely say that all of the print media we're working with, all of them have digital and social. Reader has podcast and video. And then there, as Susie mentioned, there's probably some 200 outlets in Chicago area if you include those that are kind of news podcasts, like Ergo is kind of a combination of culture / politics coverage. So I think you're right. It has to include those that are just digital or video, audio, plus the traditional media that has adapted and has, because we have almost 300,000 on Twitter for the Reader. So we do dozens of tweets a day, some of them news, some of them culture, and certainly breaking stuff. We're not breaking news like CNN, but we're certainly there to cover significant Chicago stories. But you're right, the adaptation to the new technologies is how you reach across the generations. What's funny about the Reader is we're finding, because there isn't as much print out there in competition, that the remaining print are doing better. So if we can make it through this dark place of advertising withdrawal and get to a more membership reader-based model, I think some of the print will thrive in that scenario. But it is a real big economic question.
And yours is a great question, and I think it almost goes back to what you said, is you have to meet people where they're at. So if you are worried about vaccines, then you have to make sure that there's the Mom Squad on Facebook. You have to go to them because they connect almost the whole South Side with. So if there's and if you're talking about Black millennials, you need to go to the Tribe, or you need to go to the outlets out of the University of Chicago. That Black youth media, you need to go to OI if you're talking about issues that might have to do with Hispanic community or on all sorts of different things. But there has to be some thought behind what do we want at the end to happen, and so who do we have to reach for that to happen? It can't just be let's just throw these releases out there, let's just throw this information out there, because as Tracy well said, they're spending a lot of money on media. The administration always does, and probably will in perpetuity.
Public relations.
And public
Each
relations.
of the departments has their own public relations people, probably. So there's no coordinated effort between Department of Health and Family Services and all the other departments, from the things like aviation to health department. So some kind of coordinated media effort, both on the public relations and on the marketing side, would serve them better. They would get better distribution, better coverage. So yeah, I mean, it's been pretty bad for the whole time I've been covering it.
Yeah. And if they can be strategic about it, then they're going to be more effective. Yeah.
This has been really good dialogue. I'm going to shift to the whiteboard simply because we got some really good takeaways that I think we can then build out on so we can start to construct the memo. Okay? Okay. So I got 4 points, and for each one of the points, I want us to then answer the question, how can we measure the transparency of the next administration? So for the first point, we have our events. What meetings or events will we suggest that the mayor have on a consistent basis with ethnic and community media outlets? And then how are we going to measure the transparency of those meetings? What I mean by this is so that different events are not like one and dones, So like there's one getting together, one meeting, and then we hear nothing else, right, for the remainder of her term. So how do we suggest, or what is the frequency? What might be the data keeping or dissemination of the notes from those meetings? Like, what is the frequency behind those meetings that we suggest that the mayor have with ethnic and community media on a consistent basis, and how do we measure the transparency?
I would suggest two sets of meetings. One is the business side, kind of the marketing and business side, where you're talking about vendor relationships with agencies that do external marketing for job postings, so HR, and for outreach that CTA or CDPH or others group do. So I think a business committee, that how does the city do business with community and ethnic media? And then the second would be the editorial. And I would say that probably mainly needs to be, because for conflict reasons and such, I think meeting with the editors if they'd like to, but more importantly, creating an editorial database that's public and transparent for community and ethnic media to sign up to be on, to make sure that they're on any distribution channels for all city departments. So the city could create a voluntary opt-in so that outlets could go in and change the contact information if they have a new editor, because we know that happens all the time, or reporters, multiple people from a paper can be on there, but a public way that people can opt in, and then, of course, be invited to press conferences and receipt of press releases, and then probably a secondary element to that is the reverse, which is a clean editorial contact sheet for all departments. So how do we set up, interviews and sourcing so that there's one database for the whole city whenever reporters want to do stories? So that, again, a public, transparent list of contacts within the administration for stories.
So let me throw in there that we have, it's not a totally public list. It's something that we charge people for, but starting with the media guide that we have, which is an extensive list of thousands of people, might be helpful. And we can find a way where we can maybe utilize that
Well, you
and
could
turn it.
email that list if they're willing to create a list, and then you could send to them and say, if you want to opt in, go fill out this form or something.
Yeah, well, it also may be something strategically that may be time to turn our list outward, and make it. Right, and make it, and use it as a start for public, for transparency, for whatever, because I think it's really, if it's something where, because I'll be honest with you, any list that you have where you're expecting people to update it without nag factor is not going to work. Without a project manager, without somebody who's going to be checking on it on an annual basis. I have no problem with that, but
You're right, they probably won't.
yeah, but I do think that in other words, I think we have a starting point for this, so that they're not starting bare. We have, I think we have somewhere over 6,000 contacts in there, and that can be something that we can really talk about with a public-private partnership to make it transparent, possibly, and to get maybe some foundation funding to make sure that, since it's a city attribute and that it is kept up. So I couldn't agree with you more. It is always seemed to me that a list like that is almost crucial to the public debate.
And I will go so far as to say, now this is my public narrative hat. I will go so far as to say that the city is very much so interested in the list, because we get inquiries all the time about accessing a one-day pass or a yearly pass. for the guide, even from the Cook County Board Chair's office. So the interest is definitely there. I love being able to frame it in that way to kind of demonstrate the ease of developing this and keeping it ongoing. And then acknowledging that we understand that it may be like somewhat of a challenge to maintain, especially if there's a learning curve with the technology or however, right? But being willing to kind of work through some of those problems so that we can see this actually happen and the upkeep take place. Anything else as far as events are concerned?
Yeah, so frequency, I think the business and marketing, I would say that would be the one that's more frequent because there's so much more potential there that is very new to the city, and so many departments that this is a lot more meetings that need to happen, possibly department level. Whereas the editorial, I don't think you're gonna get editors to attend a lot of meetings at the city. So realistically, once a year or once every 6 months to have an event where they're invited to talk about these issues and see how it's working. But just making sure they're invited to the press conferences, to the, typical public press events anyway, as opposed to just the same old, couple dozen people.
So do you think the business meeting should be once every quarter?
I think to start a quarterly business meeting and having the possibility of a loose network of these entities being represented by people who are willing to attend these meetings, if that makes sense, right?
And I would like to see, on the flip side, I would like the mayor to think of quarterly, I really want to conduct a news conference that is dealing with the issues that these community and ethnic media outlets are dealing with, so that they become the key invitees for that news conference, as opposed to, we're just going to do, we're going to comment on what happened in City Hall today, we're going to comment on the City Council meeting, we're going to comment on the latest press release. I would like some intentionality with this administration that dealing with them should be something that is regular and that is vital. So what are we going to talk to them this quarter? What are we going to talk to that quarter? How are we going to highlight an issue that we know will go straight out to people and will affect people and can change the problem, whatever it may be?
I really don't have a lot to say except for this. There are multiple community event boards, event lists that go out in the different communities. But I think what's not happening is representation from the city to validate some of them. Well, say the 83rd Street Block Club, for lack of a better term. They've been able to, they keep their block clean, they're working together as a unit. They developed a security system, everybody got cameras so that they got their, viewing. These are important things. And so they have their little meetings, and so not the CAPS person. Not the CAPS person. I have nothing against CAPS because I work with it. But every now and then somebody from the city, from the mayor's office, could come by, and that's something they could highlight to show that the communities are working. There is a sense of we can take charge of where we are. We can help to create change. I think that's important, to be able to connect. You understand what we're doing, and so you're going to let other people know because we're like the role model. We appreciate that because we've spent money, we're working together. We don't hear that kind of stuff. And the people from, quote unquote, the mayor's office, not CAPS, they don't come out. I don't even know how many of them they're aware of. Now, if it's something big, now let me say this, if the alderman says they having something, and the alderman designates this as something important, you might get somebody from the mayor's office quickly. But when you're trying to meet the people where they are, sometimes you have to be in a position to go places you've never been.
So what I would love to see with that is especially with, since we're talking about community and ethnic media, I would love to see where a story about that block club was done in whatever is the neighborhood, and that we designate and highlight those in some way, maybe through Chicago Stories or something like that, so that the mayor can actually see them, so the administration can know. I mean, we do ourselves a horrible disservice in the media by projecting that every community of color is a dangerous place. Any community that is low income is a dangerous place. We have people who parachute in and talk about how people are dying there, and they don't talk about how people are living. So being able to normalize day to day, being able to differentiate and show how people are and who people are, I think that's something that I think that the community and ethnic media could do, elevating those stories of how important those are. And that's part of what I think we also as citizens have to demand of the news outlets around us. Tell the story of what's good. Don't just tell the story of what's bad.
Told in many languages. Same story, just told in the language that's appropriate for the area where it's going to run. Because no matter where you live, if you and your group, your block, wherever it is, get organized, this is one of the ways you can take back control. Nothing in life is guaranteed, but you put things in place. You've got a commitment. You've got a phone tree. You know what people's cars are like. You know what people you normally are home. You have a sense of staying in contact. This can resonate across the city. This one story about this one block, you see what I'm saying? And what they did can be picked up by our different medias.
That's what you were saying, elevate the stories in the community, relate it to the mayor.
Yeah, so I think that's important.
And I think that's vital. Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
That's just a great point. Thank you. She needs to have the perspective of the city and not just, if she has the perspective of the city from the downtown media, then she doesn't understand the city.
She cannot use the same people.
Right.
She's got to be open to.
She use better source material.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. She's got to be willing to listen to some other people.
Yeah.
And also don't be ashamed to do the research on these new people, as well as about what the old people have done. Because what you're trying to build here is trust. Yeah. That at the end of the day, you want people to trust, you want people to look for something that says from the mayor's office, okay, this is important, I need to pay attention, this is gonna benefit me in some way or help me do something, or it may be good news, it may be bad, something I need to be aware of.
We are all looking at signs now for, is it the same old, same old?
That's what I'm telling you.
Is this going to be different?
Yes.
Are you going to actually make the effort to
Yeah.
campaign on it?
And also letting her understand that we know she can't change the city of Chicago into Chicago Wonderland overnight. It's going to be a process. But as you indicated, we need to start somewhere. And if we start working with the people that are already here, we might be able to keep some of them from leaving. Because people begin to feel isolated, not invalidated. All we are is collecting taxes and parking meter fees. That's a mindset that's... No, but I'm serious. But we've got to begin to change that. And we need to understand that that's a problem, and it's a media problem, because a lot of that has come through the media, whether it was print or on 2579. It's a media problem too, and for whatever reason, like you say, the editor's not coming to no meetings because they on the throne. They're not coming down necessarily.
It's not even that, it's just that they're not gonna come to a meeting of the city because working with the city is antithesis of what an editor usually is, oppositional.
Yeah, but
it would be, there's a real murky ethical area.
Yeah, so that's what I meant, it's just a different, but they'll do things, to come and cooperate with the city is a little awkward. It's awkward for a reporter. Oh, no.
So I wanna add one other tidbit in here, because as I'm listening, I don't hear like any gaps, like we missed anything. I think this is a really solid starting point for this particular point. And basically the outcome here, we're looking at establishing trust with the transparency in this process. So my next question, and I forget what was said that made me even think of this. A lot of, what was it? You talked about how the media emphasizes the parking tickets, right? Same thing with the violence that we see, right? Now, when we attend meetings like at City Club of Chicago and Superintendent Johnson gets up and he talks about the numbers and how, the crime is decreasing and the technologies that they're adding and those sorts of things, it really amazes me how I can hear that in those meetings. I never hear that on the news. So how do we close that gap? Do you think that this is a plan to start that maybe once it's enforced with the mayor's office, that it can then translate within CPD and other departments across the city?
I think it's possible.
Yeah? Okay.
I think it has to actually, in order for because the trust is always connected to something. Where you're getting the information from, who's disseminated it. All of those things are going to feed into the trust factor. And so I think at some point they have to. They have to find a way. And it cannot just be us. They have to be willing to be committed to finding this new way of doing things and making themselves more transparent and developing that trust. Trust has got to be the thing, because what lacks is trust. And I mean, we've been told so many stories about so many things that didn't happen, didn't work out, the money wasn't there, for whatever reason. But I think what's important is they understand that we do hear, but we don't hear what we need to hear. We listen, but we don't hear what we need to know. We don't react because we don't know where to go for the action. We don't know who's in charge, who's on first, who's on second. It becomes a little bit too personable, at least it has in some instances as far as in the police department. And I'm just going to use them because they are very, very, very dramatic about what it is said about them. The truth always hurts. I mean, at the end of the day. But we've got to find a way as a community. That would be my goal, to ask her to work with the people who are actually doing something. Either have a track record of doing something, or some of our new people, bloggers that have people who are really paying attention, to work collectively to try to level the playing field and make things more relevant for the people and be able to see some kind of result. Short-term goals. Like you teach, you have short-term, long-term. Let's set up, the first one could be the meeting. Calling the meeting together. That's something different. If we don't, we'll end up doing things the same way and nothing gets done.
Okay, this is the last question I have that's not on this list, I think. Do you think that as a result of how things have always been done, do you think that the people of Chicago have grown desensitized?
Yeah, we're uneducated in many ways because we have stereotyped so many different places. How many of us have traveled to different places and people are like, "Are you safe? You're living in Chicago." We do know when we're talking about violence that it happens in about 8 communities, right? And that's 8 communities out of 177. Or 77, I'm sorry, 177. I just expanded the size of Chicago. So we aren't necessarily always told 101 and basic information. We don't get that. That's not how news starts. News is always about, I'd like to see a little bit more different approach to news, which is every once in a while starting, which we see occasionally, 101 stories about different things. This is a 101 story about these neighborhoods, or about that neighborhood, or about let's focus in on it a little bit more. Let's not just, again, parachute in on it. But I think, too, then we think about, we look at the recent headlines about how we saw, was it pretty black youth coming downtown. And I was actually at a party where someone said, "Did you see that? They were looting and they were..." I'm like, no, they weren't looting at all. They were not I read the stories. There was a couple people, they're teenagers. They probably got mouthy, they got a little difficult. Yes, there were some, and the police were on hyper
they were hypervigilant about it, which is another thing that we would expect from them. So how are we getting the stories? Who are giving us the right stories, and who are we dependent upon? Are our newsrooms, do they deal with intersectionality? Do they deal with, who are the people in these newsrooms that are saying, we're giving you the stories? Historically, the Chicago press has been not inclusive. So that's another thing. I think we get a distorted picture, and then we get lackadaisical about it, and we turn to stereotypes, because we have to deal with day to day.
But to the original question of insensitivity, I think that there's also this element to a certain degree that particularly when there are negative stories about maybe a certain sector of Chicago, that you have some people that say, well, that's not happening in my neighborhood. So we're not, and I think that goes to being insensitive or desensitized. If it's a problem happening over there, or not on the north side, or not on the south side, or the west side, that neighborhooding is good, but because we've become desensitized in some way, we're all split up, and we need to come back together and realize that the neighborhood is the foundation of Chicago, okay? And if that doesn't happen, then you do have some, what's the word, disinterest, or people really just, everyone for themselves, okay, as opposed to coming together. And that's where we really need the ethnic press and the different things that we've been talking about to come together and work. So that I do feel can help push people back to being Chicagoans again, that whether you're a Chicagoan that lives, in, I don't know, Kenwood, or whether you live in, Rogers Park, that you're still all together, and that you are interested in what's happening within each neighborhood, because to a certain extent, you'll begin to realize it's also happening in your neighborhood, and you need that information.
I have a question. Because I don't know. I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know. But in the midst of this about the media, how much pressure can she put on the aldermen, the people who represent these communities, to assist in this process?
Yeah, I don't think today for sure she has some power there, but she's just learning.
Well, I'm just asking the question.
Yeah.
I'm just asking
Yeah.
because
I think what she can do, so to Susie's point, if you look at who makes up the Chicago Tribune, especially, and TV news in Chicago, the likelihood that any of them live in the zip codes that they're covering, or even region that they're covering, with the exceptions of people like Natalie Moore, is pretty slim, right? And so when a mayor only gives interviews with TV networks or Tribune, then you're basically being interviewed by suburban reporters, or reporters in very safe areas of the city that don't really experience on a day-to-day basis. So I think diversifying who she gives interviews to is critical, because if her interview appears in La Raza or The Crusader or Southside Weekly, it does reach and build a different kind of trust. So to your point about, do these things lead to a better city? I believe they do, because if people think she understands them through their media channels, whether that's a podcast or whatever it might be, a blogger, she's going to get different questions.
yeah, they begin to feel more attached, more as if they have that connection that she's probably looking for by going that way, because people can identify. Right now, they don't have nothing to identify with. Technically, they just don't. And so there's a sense of hopelessness as far as or nobody believes what they hear.
Well, it's a fractured time nationally, and it is and it's been a fractured time in our state. We have, we have sat and watched our parties have a standoff on what? Our money. Our money. You're not doing anything to pass a budget. And now we're watching standoffs at the federal government. We have to be desensitized to some of this, or we cannot function. And so, offering
there's hope that the mayor has somewhat of an anecdote to this, anecdote, I'm not, I've got the wrong one. I like anecdote, it's one of my worst words there. She's going to be a pill against all this. There's hope that there will be change, but that's a lot of pressure as well, because she has to operate under the state as well as the federal issues, and money comes, and those pipelines, et cetera. I just think that if we could start, what we know at the heart is that Chicago is an amalgam of phenomenal stories, of amazing people. And if we could start by making sure that she deals with the different stories from the different neighborhoods, that would be huge. Don't just concentrate on the downtown. Move to the neighborhood outlets, move to the smaller outlets, because they may not have the same numbers, but they're going to have more impact, because the people who read them cover to cover, read them website to website, read them and care about them and are loyal to them. So if we can change, as you said, who she talks to and the people who interview her, and maybe that quarterly thing that we're talking about with Editorial, maybe we ask her to make sure that quarterly she does an interview with an outlet that she wouldn't normally do one with. At least.
I'd say once a week.
Would be once a week would be
Once a
great.
week, if you think there's 200 outlets, in 2 years, she'd get to all of them.
That'd be excellent.
Yeah, one a week.
I just think there's a big elephant in the room,
No,
and I think what we're talking
it's
about
too
now is an opportunity to take a bite out. That's the best way to eat an elephant, is one bite at a time. I think this is one of the bites.
I'm holding it.
No,
Well, it's for the TV.
right, I think that we're talking about, there's a big elephant in the room. And the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And I think these things that we've talked about are part of a bite. And because you got to start somewhere. Why not start in media? You know, why not start here? I think.
Also introduce our editor while she's on deadline tonight, but this is Karen Hawkins.
So I really think that these are good points. And like I said, I think some excellent ideas have been, mentioned, and ways to try to make that change occur. And we're realistic that she's got more things on her plate than just us. Being the mayor is so much bigger than just us in this particular interest that we have. But it's important that she get this feedback, I think, and understand that how small change, consistent small change, can relate to change over long term.
I just wanted to have Karen just introduce herself real quick, because they're on deadline tonight for the paper, but.
Exactly.
Same.
Hi, my name is Karen Hawkins. I'm the interim co-editor-in-chief here at The Reader. I joined in October of last year when Tracy came as publisher, and thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you.
We'll have a great report for you. I know that you're on deadline, but could you say, if you had the little magic wand or the letter to the mayor, what would you want her to know about the community and ethnic media?
That it would be wonderful to have civic support to ensure that journalism continues in some way. I think there are models in other cities of government supporting community media. I forget what city it is, what state, is it New Jersey?
New Jersey voted to give subsidy, but then the government didn't sign it.
Thanks.
But it would be funneled through so that it wouldn't be a conflict in terms of getting it directly.
Right. So yes, that would be my wish. On my wish list would be some kind of community or government funding for community and ethnic media.
Great. Thank you. Good luck tonight. Thank you.
This is a really, really rich conversation.
And Yasmin, feel free.
Yes, please.
Yeah, all of this is reminding me of one specific interview I had. I'm blanking on the name, and maybe you will know it. He's a director of CAPS and CPD.
Not bad.
No, I can't remember, but I was interviewing him for a story I was working on for City Bureau, and one thing he said to me, he said, we have to find a way for us in CPD to connect better with local reporters in specific rather than big media outlets. You said because you guys are the middleman between us and the communities we're trying to talk to and reach, and these communities don't want to talk to us necessarily because of the reputation we have. So we have to find ways to utilize you guys as tools. And that really stuck with me because I think that you kind of said that CPD is dramatic about, what exactly, and there's a reason behind it. It's because it's true. There's reason behind it, and I think they recognize some of these flaws, and they're also struggling on how to talk to us. So I think that conversations like this are already a great start, but the issue is more kind of how do we meet in the middle type thing. So that's yeah.
And one thing about that is it's probably a 90% likelihood the reporters for those community and ethnic media outlets live in the area. To the opposite of what I said, the Tribune reporters parachuting in, it's almost assuredly the reporters from those community and ethnic are from those geographic areas as well. Depending on the paper, like La Raza's citywide, so you wouldn't necessarily say that, but for some of those very regional blogs and papers, they live there.
And I think, too, with the mayor's help, I think one of the things that's important is our neighborhoods are siloed, our people are siloed, and our media is siloed. Our community and ethnic media are siloed. They're working really hard to get to stay alive and stay afloat, and they don't always see one another. And so for the mayor to elevate them with an interview, with a with some news conference, is going to also help them and bring them together and get people to understand that it is not just, yes, the legacy press is important and plays a role, but it's not just that is informing this city. There's just hundreds of others who are really keeping the stories alive. And I think it's important for her to understand that and for her to make sure that she carries that message out to people.
And I think if utilized properly, she would see this as a tool to support and help unify the city as opposed to like one additional responsibility. Okay, so we can put this one to bed for now? Very good. All right, so our second one was city assets. The contract, you said JC Deco?
JC DeCo.
Okay.
JC DeCo is the contractor that has had the contract for many, many years of those multi-rack newspaper racks downtown, the ones where you see 8 or 10 newspapers in them. There's a committee supposedly that works on it and deals with the distribution of those things, but it needs to be they need to be more taken care of, and those. Oh, she's spelling it for. Yeah. So taking care of those and also making sure that they're utilized to the benefit of Chicago publications. I'm not sure why ever there were out-of-town publications in them. There are fewer in there now, but it should be for Chicago-based journalism publications, not ad flyers, because some of them are just ad products, like auto ad guides. No, nobody pays for them. Yeah, exactly. So that's certainly one of them, but the other kinds of city assets are CTA advertising, for the nonprofit journalism outlets anyway, and Chicago Spaces. So for example, does the city have a building that could become a journalism hub? The city has real estate. The city has lots of different assets that would be interesting to be more publicly available. It has land. CHA has land where you could create like the boxcar farmers market on the south side, you could create a media hub made out of shipping containers, right? So there's just lots of things I think the city could bring to bear that could make journalism more accessible and visible. Well, yeah, I guess assets, if you consider, if this under this would be all of the marketing assets the city does. The city spends tens of millions of dollars a year promoting itself. It promotes itself through its cultural advertising, its tourism advertising, its health department, its transit. Many of these places are not doing an adequate job of getting their help wanted ads to a diverse group of people looking for work. So both their HR ads and their marketing ads should be done on a much more judicious, whatever the word is, an equal basis, strategic and equal basis to community and ethnic media. I mean, our taxpayer dollars fund everything about this city, which means if they're spending all their marketing dollars in the Tribune, which isn't even owned locally, or CBS or whatever it might be, they need to be spending money in locally owned and produced entities.
Okay, anything else you want to add to this?
I think that's it. I think that's it. Spend money where people are at.
All right, so that was the second one. The third one, any suggestions for how we make this?
I
well,
think
this
through
is
the business and
transform-
marketing meeting.
Right, that
Yeah.
happens, okay. And then the third one was a process of dissemination. I think we covered that in
Yeah.
the first one as well. And then, I guess any final touch points on the media strategy for the mayor? I think this encompasses all of that.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, any other final thoughts on the media strategy for the mayor's office?
The only thing I would say is as the mayor is putting together her media strategy with her press secretary and all of the other PR people who will represent, that some of these people who are in this room tonight, some as well as others, maybe they talk to us. They talk to us and say, you know, we loved your letter. We loved your letter. We got it from the mayor, and we bring before them some of the numbers and some of the proof. But again, don't operate if the mayor's just going to operate from these letters and these suggestions without calling more people in. Then this whole campaign of the letters to the mayor is not going to mean anything. But if she's going to use this as a great tip sheet for people who can help and organizations who are bringing people together, voices who are thoughtful, then this is going to affect her whole administration, which is exactly what we all want. Go ahead.
I would say that each of the department heads should also have buy-in and accountability on this transparency and access. They should be doing interviews with community and ethnic media too, especially the large ones like Department of Family and Social Services and
Department of
Public Health and CHA, Education. All of them need to have this huge transparency. Because my message to her as a corporate lawyer is that everything she's ever known is to keep things close to the vest, to not communicate, to not show an expression, to not show empathy. Was one of the things she said about why, as head of the police board, people thought she didn't have empathy. She said, I thought that was my job as a lawyer, is not to visibly show a bias towards anything. But now she's not in that position. She's the mayor, and she needs to show the empathy, and she needs to understand she's going to make mistakes, and the worst thing she can do is cover those up. The worst thing. She needs to own any mistakes, be transparent, and move on. People respect that. They respect when you're honest.
Yeah, they can relate to that.
They can relate to make failure and make mistakes. We do it all the time.
And I think, I just think when government, as you said, when government makes those mistakes, they think that they're going to just go past them and nobody's going to notice. but they come out. We have a lot of amazing investigative reporters in this city. Some of them are here, some of them are at different outlets, but they come out eventually. We've heard a lot of that. You were going to say?
I just was going to say that I totally agree with everything that's been said. And I think the last thing for me is for her to understand how important it is that we trust her. And for us to trust her does not mean she's perfect. Going back to what you said, something happened, admit it happened. This is how we're going to rectify the problem. I can relate to that. I can actually relate to that and move on versus you telling me nothing happened.
Yeah.
You know, right? It's like, yeah, it's like when I hear the people say how many tourists we had in Chicago last year. Like there's no violence. There's no violence. People are coming here in droves. Well, they get a small perimeter. You know, they're not going out in the neighborhoods. They're not going to visit any place else. So yes, I just think that trust is the word that I would constantly reinforce to her. And trust by showing that she's subject to error. She's got a lot of things on her plate. And be very careful about the people that you surround yourself with. It's better to have a small group that's committed to the mission and responsibility, governmental responsibility to the people, than have a cast of thousands who are doing nothing but creating constant chaos, which is what we have today. Just my thought.
How are we doing, leader?
We're doing good.
We may be a small group, but I think we're mighty fine with ideas.
I haven't had to take notes like this since college. Like I'm in a lecture hall. So this is really good. This is really good. I think what we're going to do is use a lot of what we talked about as far as transparency and trust, understanding that she's subject to error, use some of those things to kind of like underline the things that we're asking her to be accountable for and hold other departments accountable for. But understanding that as a leader, you're going to make mistakes, and we understand that the transparency will pay for the mistakes that are made because you're not trying to hide it from us. And there was one point that I had to write it in this way because that's exactly how I heard it: respect for investigative journalism. I think that a lot of times the way the stories are communicated is predicated upon by how the journalists are treated when they go in for the information. Be it they're disregarded or, you know, there's a lack of response or however. And to understand, as we saw, what was her name again? She came in? Karen. To see how Karen came in during deadlines to just show her face and like show respect for the event and whatnot. Like they're up against the gun constantly. You know, time is constantly ticking and they have these responsibilities. So then how do we respect their role while asking that she respect our role as a Chicagoan and be accountable for what's happening across the city, right? So I think that if those things are, I think you said it like as far as like starting at the top, if those things are established within the mayor's office and then that example is set, then it kind of transcends into other areas.
And there is so much digital information about the city that is available. For her to be able to bring that together in an effort to create transparency so that not just investigative journalists, but investigative citizens, people who care about what they are doing and in their neighborhood, people who may not, sometimes journalists will look at the whole city, and sometimes what we need is actually just the information from our area to make change happen. So, that's something that if the city would put that stuff out and would be, I know it's out there, but it's also hard to get to, but would sing about it and would talk about it, that would create a huge sense of trust, accountability, and really be the doorway to a new era for this city.
putting a lot of the databases on Chicago. Digital. Oh, it's there.
Okay, so is there anything else anyone wants to add to the conversation tonight?
Yeah, I think also what I'm saying, I'm gathering just from former reporting, but I think she, in one way or another, needs to recognize the fear that communities may have in speaking to reporters because of former damage. And also she needs to recognize the fear that people in her own department have when they talk to reporters. Like an example, I was interviewing a sergeant for a story, and it was just some of the things he said to me, it was so clear that he was afraid to talk to me. And look at me, I'm a very nice person. And he was so scared to speak to me. And he refused, he let me interview him, but he wouldn't let me quote him because he was afraid that he would lose his job. And he said that to me straight up. And so I did the interview, I gathered the information, but what am I gonna do with it? I couldn't quote him, I didn't have his permission. So I think since she's in such a position of power and she works with both sides, she needs to somehow, I don't know how, but she needs to acknowledge that fear is a big factor in relationships between community and journalism. Yeah.
So I think that's really good. Then giving her another added responsibility of mediating between community and journalism. But I think going back to this sheet, it starts with the education to really help then establish where, I don't know, is it fair to say that this is where, not necessarily where we are, but where we need to go? That it's okay to begin implementing these things, or is there much uprooting that needs to continue to happen? So like, is it time to then build on these things, or is there other things that need to be reestablished before we can get to some of these next steps?
I think these would go great, I think these steps that are outlined, one, are amazing. They're little pots of gold for the departments and how to operate and how to be transparent and how to build with people. And these are easy things to implement. There isn't, except for the database of media, we haven't put anything in here that's going to cost money. We've talked about time, which is precious, but I can't think of any better way for her to spend time than to spend time talking to communities.
And reallocation of current resources.
Yes. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. We have talked about money. We've talked about reallocation of current resources to be effective, because they're not as effective as they could be now. Yeah. Yeah. But it's not spending money that she doesn't already spend, that the administration doesn't already spend. It's just doing it in a better way.
Because at the end of the day, I think all of these media things that we talked about she's like an octopus. All of these media entities are arms into the different sections of the communities that make up Chicago. And if she can change the way things have been done, the flow of information will get better. People will begin to rely on the information because it's coming from what they feel is a reliable source. And you know my word tonight, the trust can be established. So I think this is something that needs to be done because I think this is part of the problem. And I think what we've done is try to create some type of solution. We're not blaming anybody, but we're saying that here's some things that need to be considered to make a difference.
You said the trust could be established. Do you, because I started to write that, then I thought, but will we be rebuilding trust? Do you think trust was ever there in that office?
No.
Certainly not journalists.
Okay.
No, I don't think it was ever predicated on trust.
Okay.
That's just my opinion. I'm a young girl, but through all the years, I've known politics in the city of Chicago. It was never about trust. It was always about who had the power.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
who could- the money.
trust isn't the word. It was, within the agenda set, other individuals had a different agenda. And building on that, they probably did have trust within their agenda, but their agenda was not necessarily the people's agenda, or certainly a large number of people's agenda. And so I do think that we have an opportunity here with new Mayor-elect Lightfoot to come in as her campaign was more grassroots. It was more directed towards the neighborhood. So if she stays on that and uses that really as a stepping stone into governing, actually, that then we can talk about a building of trust.
Right. And I agree totally. I think one of the things that we can learn from her campaign was it wasn't a lot of glitz and glamour, but it was
No.
a consistent message.
Showing up to every forum.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's important. That, what does that do? It makes people believe it. It makes people believe that you really care.
So continue showing up.
At least, yeah, so yeah, don't stop showing up. And then also be yourself. You can't be everywhere all the time, but have your people that you're sitting there have something to say. Don't have them just show up so you can say, well, Ms. Draper from the mayor's office, could you stand up? We don't need to know that they were just there. We need to know they came there because they knew something about what the problem was. They had something to pour into the conversation. So, we don't expect her to go to everything all the time, but whoever you see and have them ready. Require people to do research about the communities that they're going to go into to speak on your behalf. So that when they come, they are a representation of you. And so the expectations should be high. I can't tell you how many times that's what they do. Well, somebody's here from the mayor's office. Can you stand up? Okay, now you stood up. So what does that mean? It means you did your job. You showed up, but you don't have nothing to say. We can't ask you any relevant questions because you don't really know what goes on in this community.
You got no power.
Right, you don't know the movers and the shakers. You don't know. You don't have any background. So I think it's so important that she empower her people that she's going to have working with her to come out in the communities. She needs to make sure it's a standard that they do research wherever they're going. So that because you know what that'll do? If they come out and can have dialogue with the people, she won't have to come. They will be able to form a relationship with her person. And that's a whole nother level of trust. But it all filters back to her because she sent them. And they represent her. So we developed a relationship with her. That person can get to her, so we have a direct connection. I'm telling you, I don't know if they see it, I don't know if they know it, or if it's just a part of the way things have always been. You just send somebody to show up. They can't talk about nothing. And that needs to stop.
So I think in summing all of this up, our strategies and our memo to the mayor is to help her to leverage human capital on all fronts. And use the resources within her office and her administration to do so, to unify the city of Chicago, to establish trust. And this is an opportunity to establish trust among Chicagoans and adopt an agenda that's focused on transparency in all agencies. Okay, awesome.